Well, here we are again. I told you I was going to talk to you about this stuff. Positive and negative feedback. So I shall do just that. A feedback mechanism is where, how to describe that, allows biological processes to self-regulate, where one part of an organism sends information back to another part of the organism in order to maintain balance in the case of negative feedback. So before I try again to define that, let's go take a look at each one of these, negative feedback and positive feedback. Of the two of those, negative feedback is by far the most common and most important. Positive feedback is very rare. Positive feedback is a means to an end. So in humans, factors under the influence of positive feedback: blood clotting, milk production, and childbirth are the only three that I know of. Whereas negative feedback leads to balance, like regulating body temperature is negative feedback. Regulating metabolic processes, negative feedback. So here's a metabolic pathway. We'll get to these metabolic pathways a bit later, but we start off with a reactant. A reactant is something that goes into a chemical equation. In this case, it's molecule A. A comes in and is worked upon by enzyme 1. An enzyme is a catalyst, a protein catalyst that conducts a specific type of operation. And enzyme 1 turns A into B. And then enzyme 2 works on B and then turns it into C. And like you can see, I know you can read, enzyme 3 turns C into D. Well, enzyme 1 can only turn A into B. It can't do anything else. Enzyme 2 can only turn B into C. It doesn't do anything else. Enzyme 3 can only turn C into D and nothing else. So the object of this metabolic pathway is to start out with a bunch of A and turn them into Ds because we need the Ds. We don't want to waste it. A metabolic pathway is very much like a production line where A are the molecules are the things coming through the production line, and the enzymes are like the workers. Well, what happens if we have enough of product D? We don't need any more. Well, then it would be wasteful to run this whole metabolic pathway. In this instance, in this example, the product D, when it becomes in large concentration, inhibits this very first step. So that when we get enough of the product D, it slows down this metabolic pathway. So hence the term negative, so that it has a calming, slowing down effect. The opposite's also true. If D gets used and we don't have of it, we need more, then it's not there to inhibit step 1, and the metabolic pathway can proceed. In this way, we balance the amount of the product D. So we don't have too much, we don't have too little. Just right. Just right. And we're going to skip past that, talk to you about that already. Oh, there they are. Doggies. Now they're clean doggies. I just gave them a bath. Okay. I'm going to just hit a couple of topics at the very end of this chapter, and one of the patterns you will see is that I'll spend more time talking to you about the material in the beginning of the chapter, and usually a little bit less right at the end, because most important stuff comes. So, striking unity underlines the diversity of life. I've mentioned that in the taxonomy section and earlier, where we have at least 4 commonalities in all of life. Their DNA is the molecule used for storing genetic information. All cells have a plasma membrane, the DNA, proteins from the same 20 amino acids, and ATP is the energy molecule. Now, the currently accepted age for the Earth, currently scientifically accepted age for the Earth is 4.55 billion years. That's a little over 4.5 billion years old. So that's a lot of time. And so how do we know what happened back then? Well, we have fossils. A fossil is trace of previous life. Right? When you think of a fossil, you're probably thinking the bones of a dinosaur. But that's true. That's a fossil. Could be a shell from a clam or snail. It could be footprints. It could be even dung, poop can fossilize. Anything that tells us at one point in the past something living. I had a previous picture of a young lady working in a DNA lab. If that's a little bit too clean and controlled for you, you get out and get out. And I encourage you to do this when you can. Get out in the world. You can learn a lot about biology in the classroom or hopefully online. But the reality is the world is out there. That's the best place to take what you learn in the classroom and the books and go apply it by going out and seeing the world. I realize you can't travel much right now in the current situation, but when the current situation lifts, get out there and see the world. You want to see some mountains and deserts, environment like that. Where I just came back from, Arizona, is incredibly diverse ecologically. The ocean, more your style. Learn how to scuba dive and go down to the Caribbean. If you don't want to scuba dive, learn how to snorkel. I can tell you, though, that you want to wear a long sleeve shirt while you're doing that and use sunscreen, or you will fry. And you don't want that while you're on vacation. But so here you can see a bunch of people. Probably some of these are professors and are students are finding fossil bones. All right, Charles Darwin. When the name evolution comes up, we always hear about Charles Darwin. And his two main points: species showed evidence of descent with modification. So if we look at the fossil record, we see that over time, the fossils change. The older fossils are different than the newer fossils. And he talked about natural selection as being defined by descent with modification. Just like I said, each generation accumulates favorable traits from their parents. And over a long period of time, these things add up. So there's Charles Darwin, a young picture of Charles Darwin. The next presentation is going to be about the life and times of Charles Darwin. But that's going to be about Charles Darwin and how he managed to come up with his theory. Why Charles Darwin and not someone else? Well, I hope to shed some light on that with a little bit of scientific history in the next presentation. But I've already explained a little bit about this. This is what he observed. He observed that individuals in a population vary. If we were in a classroom, I'd say, look around. We're all human beings, Homo sapiens, but we are different. There's none of the two of us alike unless you got an identical twin. And many of these traits are heritable. Eye color, general height, lots and lots and lots of other things are heritable. And not so much in human populations, but out in the world, many more offspring are produced than can survive. And some organisms have lots and lots of offspring. The oyster, for example. The oyster lives attached to a solid object, maybe even another oyster. But usually, think about it, a pier or a rock. They can't get up and go ask another oyster, hey, you want to go get some coffee? They can't get up to and go walk across the ocean floor and ask another oyster, hey, how about some Netflix? So what do? Well, it's not that exciting. They broadcast their gametes. A gamete is a sex cell, sperm or egg. So there's male and female oysters, and the males release their sperm into the water. The females release their eggs into the water. They float to the surface. That's where the eggs get fertilized, go through a larval stage, and then the larval stage has to find a place to be able to settle out, attach to something hard, and start taking up life as an adult. Well, oysters produce larvae, juvenile form, in the millions, and there's just not that many spaces. It's like a high stakes game of musical chairs, and there's winners and losers. And there happens to be a particular trait that a larval oyster has that help it find a good spot, and that trait is inherited. Well, guess what? It's going to pass that on to the next generation. And this is how species eventually change over time. And you see them well adapted to their environments, but environments can change. And the only thing that's constant in this world is that everything changes. I'll say that again. The only thing that's constant in this world is that everything changes. So, as I've been saying, individuals that are best adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and produce, on average, more offspring. And that'll have these favorable or advantageous traits accumulate. So, that's what this means. Evolution occurs as the unequal reproductive success of individuals. That means the ones that are better adapted, on average, have more offspring than others. Now, that's natural selection, but that doesn't include everything. There's random stuff happens too, and yeah, so that's a little bit beyond the scope of how we want to talk about evolution in the first chapter of your very first biology class. But you'll talk more about that when you study genetics, maybe when you become a junior. I can't. Whoever wrote this didn't really didn't study that very well, because the environment doesn't select for the propagation of beneficial traits. The environment selects against those that are not well adapted, because they're the ones that die off and don't have babies. Darwin called this process natural selection, and we'll leave the rest for the Charles Darwin presentation coming up next. Looks like that might not be until tomorrow. But let's see. So let's say you're a bird and you're looking for something to eat, and you come across this situation here. You see a dark background and some light-colored and dark-colored insects. They vary in their color. Some are light, some are dark. Well, the easiest one that the bird's going to eat when it first sees the light-colored one, boom, that's the one that gets eaten. Or it. It got it. Now, guess who's not having any more babies? The light-colored ones. So if the light-colored ones get preyed upon, then the ones that live are going to be dark color, and they're going to pass on that dark color to their offspring. And so later on down the road, a couple generations, then the population is going to become darker to blend into their background. There's a famous study about this that happened in England, that before the Industrial Revolution, there was a species of moth that was just like this. It had dark forms and light forms, and they were up against trees that were light colored, and so the dark ones stood out a lot and were more heavily preyed upon. And you found that the population of these insects was about 90% the light form and 10% the dark form. Well, then the Industrial Revolution came around, and the very first coal-fired power plants belched a lot of junk up into the air. I mean, it was nasty. Soot, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides. It was absolutely horrible. Coal-fired power plants today are far, far cleaner. If you see something that coming out of a coal-fired power plant, it is likely just steam. They even take the carbon dioxide out of the effluent. So don't let anybody tell you that coal or natural gas electric plants are polluting the environment and adding carbon dioxide. They're not. That stuff is removed by the use of machines called scrubbers. But that's 2020. In 1880, it was a lot different. And this soot that was belched out by these power plants covered the trees and made them dark. Well, now all of a sudden, the dark moths were hidden up against the dark colored trees, and it was the light colored moths that were exposed and preyed upon more often. And over the course of about 10 years, the genetic makeup of this population changed incredibly. It went from 90% light, 10% dark, to 90% dark, 10% light. And so, according to the definition I gave you, a change in the genetic makeup of a population over time, there's an instance of evolution happening that was recorded. They didn't know that was going to happen. Somebody who just happened to be studying this moth species because I guess they didn't have anything else to do. Well, guess what? That went on for a while, and then people got tired of the pollution coming out of these power plants and demanded that technology be produced to clean it up. So the first thing that they were able to take out was the soot. And so then with natural processes of rain and whatnot, the trees went back to being light colored again. And guess what happened? When that environment changed, the moths populations responded and it went back to the original way. When the trees became light, not that many years later, the population went back to being 90% light colored and 10% dark. So there's two examples of populations of organisms responding to environmental change. All right, well, then that's nice. So let's, I want to mention this, data. It's not data, it's data. Is how you pronounce that word, and it comes in two flavors, chocolate and vanilla. Oh wait, no, it comes in qualitative and quantitative. All right, so quantitative is numbers. Quantitative is something you can measure. If you wanted to find the average height of people in our class, we could measure each one of our heights, and we can say that's the average height in this room. It gives us a number. Qualitative or descriptive, rather than being a measurement. Jane Goodall's chimpanzee behavior. There's a nice picture about that. Qualitative would be light colored and dark colored moths. Now you can turn that sometimes into quantitative data by measuring the frequencies. Qualitative data is sometimes harder to analyze than quantitative data because with numbers you can do statistical analysis, and I'll have more to say about that during the genetics section in about another, what is it, early September, maybe another 2 months. All right, a hypothesis. That's your sort of like an educated guess. It's a tentative answer to a well-framed question. The key is the well-framed question. It's getting the question to be narrow enough that a hypothesis could possibly answer it. Which then, if you have a tentative answer, you can use that answer to predict how something might respond. And then the key to science is being able to test that observation by experimentation. Just like we, in the previous example of the moths, I wonder if the moths are changing their populations in response to this changing environment. Well, you go out there and then you say, yeah, I think, now the trees are dark, the dark colored moths are going to have an advantage. And then that's your hypothesis. So you go out there and then actually measure it. You got to be able to say that it's false. For example, a hypothesis that ghosts, a poltergeist. You can't have any supernatural explanations. Now I'm not ruling out the supernatural, and I'm not saying that ghosts don't exist, because I don't want them visiting me. But that's not scientific. All right, so hypothesis-based science is based on a textbook scientific method, but rarely follows all the steps in order. So you might have learned the scientific method as question, hypothesis, experiment, where you had a variable and a control, results, discussion, and that's nice. And there's a lot of ways that science follows that very exact pattern, but there's a lot of, just like life, there's a lot of different ways to approach answering these scientific questions, and I'll explain a couple of them to you during the course of the semester. In science, it has to be repeatable. That's another key. If I do an experiment and I come up with some results and I write it up, you should be able to do the same experiment and come up with the same results. That's just part of the deal. All right, a theory is broader in scope and more well defined than a hypothesis. And then in science, when we talk about something that's a law, like the law of gravity or the law of thermodynamics, and second laws of thermodynamics, we'll get to those too. That's something that has never been seen to be violated. For instance, the law of gravity. If you take something and you throw it up in the air and it stays there, well, then you got to have an explanation, because it's not going to just stay there because gravity's pulling on it. Maybe it's a helium balloon. There's your explanation. Most scientists work in teams, which often include graduate and undergraduate students. So I told you I'd tell you the difference between them. An undergraduate student is someone who has not yet received their bachelor degree. You graduate with your bachelor degree, and if you want to continue on, and in biology, you will. Maybe you'll go on to a professional program. Maybe you'll go on to, I don't know, some of you probably want to go to medical school, maybe a nursing program, or you may want to continue your studies and specialize and become a graduate student. So a graduate student is somebody who's studying toward a graduate degree, like a master's degree, or a PhD. PhD stands for Doctor of Philosophy. And then the graduate students, and anytime research is being conducted, the graduate student is working underneath the guidance of a mentor. It's very much a master-apprentice relationship, a master in the terms of an expert. And then graduate student would be an apprentice. And then oftentimes, and I've mentioned that you should do this too, if you can, you transfer to a university, see if you can't get in on an area of research that somewhat interests you, and become an undergraduate assistant. There's probably undergraduates in that picture of the fossil dig that I showed you. You don't usually get high-level tasks, but you get your foot in the door, and it could lead to things. It's all about people and making relationships. So if you volunteer as an undergraduate research assistant, and maybe you're just doing manual tasks like taking this off with a paintbrush, or sorting through this box of dirt, or cleaning glassware in the lab, you get to know somebody. You learn something, and maybe that person writes you a reference letter, and that helps you get where you want to go. Communication is important in science. You have to publish your results. You have to get it out there in a public realm so that other scientists could read it and critique it. You do this through seminars, presentations at scientific meetings. So yes, groups of scientists will gather together and give presentations, and then discuss the work. Well, my very first experience was in Louisville, Kentucky, at the meetings of the North American Benthological Society. North American Benthological Society, or NABS, is people that study the organisms that live on the bottom of lakes and rivers. And I gave my first presentation there about the damselfly larvae that I studied for my master's degree. It sounds like a nerd fest, doesn't it? And guess what? It is. It is. It's a really big nerd fest until 5 o'clock rolls around and they pull out eggs, and holy crap, I was surprised how wild things got. At first I was like, these are the biggest bunch of nerds I've ever been around outside of a Star Trek convention. What else we have? Publications in scientific journals. The North American Benthological Society has a collection of publications that they put out periodically. And so then here, this might be a meeting where this old guy and that old guy, they're old enough, they're probably professors, and we have some graduate students over here. And so maybe these two professors are mentoring these graduate students, and this guy's the undergraduate assistant. He's trying to figure out what's going on. And this one up here is giving a presentation on his work, and you work as a team. So you'll throw your stuff up here on the board and tell them, the rest of the people in your lab, in your group, hey, well, this is what I think is going on, and what works out is you end up getting tremendous input from the rest of the people, the rest of your team. I can tell you that in particular, my PhD work would not be anything remotely resembling what it came out to be if it wasn't for the input of some of my very important input of some of my teammates. They helped me out a lot. All right, so, oops, press that wrong button. So that's except for the Darwin presentation. That's chapter 1. Adios.